I'm talking now with Danielle Binks, literary agent and author of middle grade and young adult novels. Your new novel, Danielle, is The Monster of Her Age, which is about a former child actor grappling with events from her past and her fractured relationship with her movie star grandmother, who at the start of this book is dying. The book is about family and grief, but also about film itself. And so to begin things, I want to know what sparked this idea for you.
This one that I ended up completing during a lockdown and released it during another lockdown. This one, yes, this. Funnily enough, I kind of wrote it thinking of art first and foremost. I wanted to have a big rambling discussion about art and why it's important and the way that it can be flipped and malleable and mean different things to different people. And I was writing it at a time during 2020 lockdown when it felt like art was being a little bit forgotten and we were forgetting how important it is as a cohesive element of bringing people together and community together. But I couldn't have that discussion about books. I couldn't write a book about loving books. So I had to come at it from a different angle. And I thought, well, I'm a huge film nerd. I love film. And one of my favorite genres of film is horror, which I think is one of the most misunderstood genres across the board, but especially in film. So I came at it from that way. But really, I just wanted to have a big discussion about art and its impact on us as individuals, if you're the one creating it, but also if you're the one consuming it, how important it is to us, both on a personal level, on a community level, on a societal level. So that's kind of like the big idea that I was trying to have. And then, of course, the way that I decided to communicate that was one of the tropes that I love, which is big, rambling, complicated families and romantic feelings and all this kind of stuff. But it very much came out art at the forefront.
Yeah, well, I obviously agree completely about that and our art's power to transform ourselves as individuals, but also art's power to make change in the world. Obviously, that's. And as someone who is not a horror fan, it was really great to sort of delve into that in your book.
I love that. Thank you.
Yeah.
The other thing I got to shout out Mary Shelley and say how amazing Frankenstein is. One of my favorite books, one of my favorite authors of all time, teenage girl who invented science fiction. But I always lead from a place of thinking that art changes people and people change the world. And that's why it kind of all goes round and round and why we need it, why it sustains us.
The world.
Yeah, precisely. So I kind of challenged myself to say, this thing that you believe, see if you can say that in an interesting way, basically. But I'm glad that you responded to it. That makes me feel happy. Thank you.
Yeah. And tell us about your main character. Who tells this story?
The person that tells the story is Ellie, who comes from a long line of thespians, Tasmanian thespians, and she's amongst the youngest. When she was 11, she even starred in an Oz indie horror film opposite her famous grandmother, who's a bit of a scream queen legend, a bit of a Jamie Lee Curtis-esque film star from a different era. Ellie starred opposite her in a film and didn't have the best experience. She had a tyrannical director. Her grandmother wasn't really helping her because she had her own fame-hungry reasons for wanting to see the film go forward, etc. So when Ellie comes home, it's because her grandmother is not long for this world. And she needs to reconcile the fact that she has anger for her and love for her and grief for what she's missing out on, the conversations they didn't get to have, and put an end to this chapter of their relationship. So she's going back to Tasmania from a very complicated and complex place. She's got a lot of pent up emotions. She also has just kind of finished year 12 and doesn't know what she's going to do next. So that's in the mix as well. And then, she's got lots of complications with her family, but then she meets a young woman from a feminist horror film club who is just the kind of spark that she needs, the circuit breaker that she needs, that comes at the worst possible time, because Ellie starts to develop sort of feelings for her as well. So it's really bad timing with what's going on with her grandmother and the family and all this kind of pent up emotion. But she meets this young woman called Ria, who starts Ellie off seeing herself in a different light, seeing her family in a different light, seeing art in a different light. And suddenly she starts, I think, imagining a future for herself. So we're meeting her on the precipice of a lot of things happening.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably one of the most interesting places to explore a teenage character, is right on that tipping point of so much.
And the other thing that complicates Ellie's story is like secret keeping. So whether it's secrets perhaps she's been keeping from herself, from her past, or keeping her family's privacy is very important to her and her grandmother, in terms of her relationship with Ria and the other young women from the club. Yeah, and that was a really powerful technique you used to sort of raise the stakes.
I like secrets in families. I like just throwing out these kind of very complicated relations amongst family members. I like having tension amongst family members. So one of Ellie's cousins comes to stay for a little while, Yale, who is a character I loved writing because she's a little bit of a head nod to all my cousins whom I love and adore. But she's a bit of a rascal and she's a bit of a fire starter and she's just very cool and very out there, and Ellie's not feeling that way in the moment. And then they've also both got this grief that they're coming to about their grandmother. But I do like secrets amongst family. It's that thing of the truth will set you free, and the inverse of that is, what is a secret doing to you then? I love that pent up emotion. I really like flicking the match and just seeing what's going to happen with my characters once I do that to them. That's fun.
Yeah, and you've definitely created a vast cast of characters in this book with all the different family members. And alongside the story of Ellie and everything she's coping with, you've also created a world that's like a reimagined Australia. And so I hoped you could tell us a little bit about this twisting of history that you've done.
Yeah, as soon as I decided that film was going to be the backdrop for this family, that this was going to be the kind of legacy that they have as a filmic, theatre, television history, I started delving into that in Australia. And I was really surprised to find, and I kind of vaguely knew this from being the film nerd that I am, but I kind of forgotten it until I delved back in for my research. I'm a big one for research. I like it. But I found that Australia actually released the first feature-length film, The Story of the Kelly Gang. We were first cab off the rank in the whole world. And we were actually producing and making a lot of films during the silent film era. We had some really impressive filmmakers, many of them women. It was really impressive and it was an incredible time. And then it all changed. Suddenly talkies came in and the Americans were way far ahead of us in terms of technology for that. They started accruing all of the kind of famous legendary people of the golden era of film, etc. And we just lost pace with it. Also because our government wasn't investing in what was happening in that artistic sphere. So we really fell behind the pack, and we never really caught up. We didn't actually catch up until we had the Gorton and Whitlam governments, the two from different spheres of politics as well, John Gorton and Gough Whitlam, who both came in and decided to make these creative film funds and to actually fund education in the film industry, the film and television industry, because they both recognized that Australians weren't telling Australian stories. We were relying on American stories and British stories to tell our narrative. And therefore we weren't really getting a place to explore ourselves and our identities. And when you don't have that in a culture, when you don't have a culture talking to itself and seeing itself, whether it be in books, film, on the stage, in theatre, etc., it's just silence. And that's really frightening because, like I said, art changes people and people change the world, and nothing changes if you don't see what's happening around you and see it reflected and have conversations about it. So I was doing all that kind of research, and I just kept thinking, gosh, it's such a shame that we missed out on that huge period of filmic enterprise where Hollywood was being established and all of these, foundational films were coming out. In Australia, this wasn't part of the conversation. We were cut off because we weren't investing in that in the arts generally, but particularly in this art form that was causing a lot of conversation. So I just sort of tugged on that little thread of history and said, okay, but what if I changed it? What if we just had a sliding doors moment? What if we just flipped the narrative? Let's pretend that the family that I'm creating, the Lovingers, were actually a Barrymore-esque family of thespians who were there right from the beginning. And I inserted a long-lost relative into the Kelly Gang feature-length film. I just said, yeah, one of them played Ned Kelly, because no one knows who played Ned Kelly in that silent film.
Really?
Yeah. They think it was a few different people, hence why there's no one accredited actor to it. So I just kind of went, all right, it was a Lovinger. And from there, I just kind of imagined, what if we had a really rich and involved film history that was keeping pace with what was happening in North America and Europe. And I really enjoyed imagining that.
Was there like an ethical dilemma about writing false history?
Well, yeah, I did wonder if I've created a false history for so many years, kind of plugging the hole where we didn't have a film industry, can I mention actual films that did come out later on, especially in the 70s, 80s, 90s, and I decided that I would. So I've chucked in a lot of the book takes place at the State Cinema in Hobart, which is a bit of an iconic cinema anyway, but it's where Ria, the young woman who runs the Feminist Horror Film Club, works. So I have them going there, and I actually went there and I looked around the place. I did a whole research trip in December 2019, and I spent a lot of time at the State Cinema, and they have these really beautiful movie posters all over the place. So I name check those, and I got to insert a few of my favorite Australian films, like Looking for Alibrandi is name checked. The Sapphires is name checked. Strictly Ballroom, I think I threw in there as well. Somersault. So I decided that yes, up to a point, I would create a film history, and then I would still tip my hat to all the films that have come out since that are Australian, that I love, that are iconic, that went a long way to me seeing myself on film for the first time. I mean, I think I'm from that generation who just bows down to Melina Marchetta, and Looking for Alibrandi as a book and a film adaptation still just looms so large in my cultural touchstone. So I had to name check that, as if I could pretend that film never came out. There was no way. So that was the kind of cutoff point that I gave myself, was yes, we can still have Strictly Ballrooms of it all, and also fill in and make up the other stuff. But I did have a friend who was working for a time in Canberra at the National Film and Sound Archives, and that went a long way to me helping craft the fictional film history. So Manda, who's acknowledged in the book, I do show my working out, and I do acknowledge who's helped me along the way, but Manda helped me in pointing me in the right direction for a little bit of my research. If I was going to make a fake film history, I should probably go through the archives of what we did have and then plug in the holes. So yeah, that was fabulous. But I'm looking forward to going to the Centre for the Moving Image, very much so. I'm looking forward to just going to the movies and then to the theatre. All of that's on my bucket list.
Absolutely. I watched the little clip that was on Q&A of Virginia Gay's Cyrano and wept my little heart out.
I know. I mean, that came, I think, in a real dip in the week. I think we were all collectively feeling it. And then it felt like when that aired, it felt like I could feel our entire state just take a healing breath and go, that was amazing, and just get us all a little bit excited for what's to come once we can leave, once we can go out and explore theatre and art. Funnily enough, keeps coming back to art, keeps coming back around to art. It's the thing that we're all craving. We can't always articulate that, but I guarantee you, most of us, all of us, that's the thing that we're missing, is the community around art, is the liveliness around art, is the conversations that come from around art. That's what we're missing.
Absolutely.
And family.
Industry. You play a multitude of roles in the industry, and I was wondering, as an agent and a reader and a writer, how you approach being more than one thing. For me, I just found it too hard in a lot of ways. So I'd love to hear your experience.
Yeah, it is really hard, and it's probably gotten a little bit harder since my books have come out. When you're writing, when you're in the draft stage, it's all kind of theoretical. If this thing is going to come out, how am I going to fit that into the rest of my work and my role? And suddenly it's out, and suddenly your whole life is books and publishing. Like literally, your hobby, which writing for me is, because my day job is the literary agent side of things, but it's suddenly all encompassing. So I think I have to remind myself that I need that. It's going to be ironic to say right now, but I need that family time. I need that time out in nature. I need that time with my dog, Murray. I need to go and, walk him. I need to occasionally not look at my computer on a weekend. I need to remember to read recreationally, not just to read with that industry brain that's depicting and breaking down everything that I'm reading in an evaluation sense. I need to actually remember that I'm also a fan, that I also just love books and reading. But it is hard. It is definitely hard. And I probably find myself getting more cynical and more in the industry hive mind when I'm not writing for myself as an author. And that's when I have to sort of start setting aside month-long gaps for me to put aside the agenting and say, okay, you're going to have a month to get the first draft down. Or that's not a month of just writing. It's a month of walking the dog and thinking. It's a month of reading books that I love. It's a month of just playing in my imagination. But it's really hard, and I'm still a newbie at it. And I'm still figuring out what works for me, what the routines are, what the circuit breakers are. And I'm not quite there yet. but I think I will be. It's been harder in lockdowns for sure. And I
Mm.
have to acknowledge that as well and not be too hard on myself. But I think so long as I always keep coming back to the art is the thing, you know, that's
Yeah.
what sustains me.
And so, yeah, you are writing for teenagers, but you also have your book, The Year the Maps Changed, for middle grade. And so in the same way that you're kind of
Oh, this
stuck
one?
between, that's the
Oh,
one,
that one? Oh,
stuck between agenting, writing, reading,
yeah.
you're also writing for multiple readerships. How's that gone?
It's been really interesting. I never thought I would write for middle grade. I always thought that I was an avowed fan of young adult literature. I was the supporter of YA. I was involved in Love Oz YA, Love Australian Young Adult Literature. I thought, and everyone I think kind of expected me to come out the gate with a young adult novel. But then my first idea for a story that I tried to have a 17-year-old male protagonist for The Year the Maps Changed just didn't work. The words weren't coming. It wasn't until I flipped it and made my protagonist in that book 11 going on 12, partly because it's set in 1999 for reasons of historic things happened then. The Kosovo War was happening, which is a big event that's involved in the book. But also in 1999, I was 11. So once I opened that little door in my head, suddenly it all came pouring out because I very vividly remember being that age. And I gave a lot of myself and my traits to that character. And I just found such joy in that readership, even though it was a readership that I was reading a lot of. You know, I think back in maybe 2012, 2011, I discovered the Newbery Medal, which is the big award in America for middle grade books. I'd never heard of it before, and I'd never really heard of the term middle grade, which is a very Americanized term. You know, there's junior school, middle school, high school, and middle grade purports to the middle years. But once I remember what it was as well, particularly when I read Rebecca Stead's When You Reach Me, which won the Newbery. I can't remember what year exactly, but when I read that book, it was like a spark went off inside of me, and I just loved and adored those books for that readership. So they were in the back of my mind, but I never thought I would write for it until I had a character come along and kind of knock on the door inside my head and say, hey, I'm not a teenager yet, and here are all the reasons why. And I think that was me needing to be a little bit instinctive with the story as it comes to me and listen to my characters a little bit, which I know sounds really wanky, but it really does happen. Some characters are just older or younger. They're going through different, like, you know, Ellie in The Monster of Her Age has very complicated, complex feelings with her family that are very mature and what she's grappling with. And compared to what Fred in the book is going through, very, very different. I think I'm always going to be in a perpetual state of wanting to write in the readership that I'm not currently. So when I was writing The Monster of Her Age, I had an idea for a middle grade book, which I'm now going to go off and explore. But when I was writing The Year the Maps Changed, that was when Ellie came to me. So always when I'm writing in the opposite, I have that grass is always greener thing. But I think I found a really good heart place for myself in middle grade. Something about middle grade I missed when I wasn't writing it. I've loved now that The Year the Map Change has been out for a year, and I did CBCA Book Week a few weeks ago. I loved talking to kids that age who are just delightfully obsessive with what you've written, and they can like quote things from certain pages and they get very angry at you for the choices that you made as an author because they're so passionate about it. So I love that age group, and I've had the most beautiful emails from year 6s and year 5s in that age group who were kind of in the emails, they're kind of shocked that I was able to capture the feelings that they have through Fred. They're like, oh my gosh, you did that. And I just think that's so delightful because I can see myself in them. That's the age when I got really hooked on reading, me personally. And whenever I get those interactions, I think, yeah, that's why I do it. I remember that fever time when you're discovering books and you're discovering that there are authors out there who can kind of unscrew the top of your head and pour out these ideas that look like what's going on inside of you, and how incredible that is. But I definitely think that I let my characters lead now. My characters tell me their age and where their stories are at, and I'm just going to forevermore listen to them because they are wiser than I am.
That's great. And you're always learning about yourself as a writer, and that's so exciting. I'm excited to see what happens next.
Yeah.
And what you're saying about young readers is so true. As when I was working as a bookseller, for which I did for a very, very long time, they're the readers that you want to come in, because they come in and they're happy to talk to you about what they want, and they will say, nope, that is not what I like. And so honest. Teenagers, there are some teenagers who are very open and you can have all those conversations with, but I think that's an age when you want to discover things for yourself.
Yeah, definitely.
Don't want to
And
be
I
told.
think something about the monster of her age, especially because there's an LGBT storyline in there as well. I think there's something about teenagers keeping those explorations a little bit close to their chests, as they want to do, because this is the time to explore. This is the time to question. And books are a great way to do that, to just see, does this appeal to me? What about this speaks to me? But that's very personal. It's very private. You probably don't want to be blasting that to an author over Zoom, during book week or etc. So I completely, understand and adore that. But you're right. It depends on the reader, but young readers especially, I think because they are on that cusp of just everything is so new and exciting to them. And they're just very excited at the prospect of going to a bookseller and saying, do you know that this book that you said that I would like is actually really good?
And so I want to ask you a little bit about inspiration. It has been a really difficult year, 2 years. And I wondered if the way that you find inspiration and creativity has changed over the past year or so.
Gosh, yes, it has. I found myself kind of running through ideas that I could possibly explore that weren't really exciting to me. And then I kind of realized at some point that they were stale to me because I wasn't reading enough. I was just consuming film and television. And I know, having written The Monster of Her Age, you'd think, of course, you love film. That should be enough to sustain you, but it really wasn't. So I had to get out of that habit of just mindless media consumption. And I had to get back into, like I was saying, loving reading. And I did that via listening to audiobooks. There are just some authors who I absolutely love and adore listening to on audio. David Sedaris is one of them. Just that iconic voice, which is an adult author. Taylor Jenkins Reid, another adult author that I just loved reading her books via audiobook. I had to come to it in a different way. And I did find myself, on the days when I wasn't getting out in nature and exercising, I found myself in a slump for ideas, until it's so annoying that it's true. If you drink a lot of water and you do get out and exercise and get into nature, good things happen. But it's so annoying as an adult having to acknowledge that does work, because sometimes you just don't have the motivation until you're halfway through a 6-kilometer walk and you think, oh no, I do feel better. Damn it. And I'm going to go home and I'm going to drink water and feel even better. Damn it. So when I was getting down on myself and I found my ideas really rudimentary and not that exciting, I realized part of that was because I wasn't engaging with art from my own cultural background in my own country. And I was craving, I was craving reading stories from people that I know and love and who I wanted to know more about from the perspective of being an Australian. So that was when I had to go and reach for like Gary Lonsborough's, The Boy from the Mish and everything like that, and think, oh wait, this is good art. This is why I love creating Australian set stories, etc. So love Oswaye does work.
Love Oswaye will love you back.
Yeah, exactly. It will remind you why you do what you do. It will remind you why it's important to care that teenagers see themselves on the page or on the screen.
Absolutely. And you're talking about filling that well with creativity. I went through, probably like everybody else, with that lack of focus and inability to read, especially at the sort of start of last year, but have found so much joy in reading in recent times. And I read Gary's book, Boy from the Mish. I read Alice Pung's 100 Days. I think I've read every YA that's come out in the past year, which is really fantastic. But what have you been reading?
So with my kind of agenting brain on, the finished copies of Kay Kerr's Social Cue arrived. Kay is one of my authors. That's just a note from the author to me because I'm her agent and I just keep that tucked in there. So the finished copies of this arrived. I probably read this already about 3 times, but it's different reading it in finished form. It just is. Your brain absorbs it in a very different way when it's actually in a beautiful packaged book form. So that's arrived and I'm reading that, snatches of that, and remembering the kind of history that we have with this that I absolutely love. I'm reading from America, one of my favorite authors of all time, A.S. King. Yeah, the Switch, that is just stunning. She's just one of the cleverest writers and I appreciate her so much. Please Ignore Vera Dietz is one of those young adult books that made me want to be a writer. So she's kind of up there with Melina Marchetta for me in a very big way. And then because at nighttime, especially if it's wild weather at night, I kind of crave fantasy. So I've been reading Siesta Cat's Dark Rise, which is coming out September 28th. Oh, shiny. And a shiny early copy. So I've been reading that. So all those books kind of match my different moods at different times. And it's just my brain now that I crave at least minimum 3 books at a time, because that brings me joy.
I love it. That's a fantastic strategy. Oh, thank you so much, Danielle, for taking time to talk with me today. I do want to point out that this episode is being supported by Farrell's Bookshop in Mornington. And this is a fabulous indie bookshop, which is an integral part of their community. I might let you talk about it, Danielle.
Farrell's is my bookshop. Farrell's is actually name checked in The Year the Maps Changed. It's a bookshop that Fred and her grandfather visit to purchase books in 1999, because that's how long it's been around. Oh my goodness. If you look in the sneaky acknowledgements, you'll also see me shouting out to all the beautiful booksellers at Farrell's that are there, who I just love and appreciate. And actually, Farrell's bookshop across 2 of my books was meant to be launching me twice, but The Year the Maps Changed came out in April 2020, and that book launch got cancelled. The Monster of Her Age was meant to come out the weekend that we ended up going up into lockdown this time around. So they have my whole heart. They are the most beautiful booksellers. Very cluey. Oh my goodness, they're cluey. There are different booksellers there that I go to if I want like fantasy recs, crime recs, contemporary recs. Just sublime. Beautiful children's book selection as well, particularly of picture books, which my nephew absolutely loves and adores, that I love and adore Farrell's, because he reaps the benefits of me just wanting to shove all these beautiful picture books into his face, which he's more than happy for me to do. But Farrell's Bookshop in Mornington has my whole damn heart, and they were meant to be launching me across 2 books that got felled twice in 2 lockdowns.
Oh, that's
so please,
upsetting.
By all means, show them some love, because I love them. And you should too. They do online orders. They are magnificent, and they'll always appreciate a phone call or an email if you're after a recommendation as well. They're good for a chat. So there you go.
And there will be a link to Farrell's in the description of this video, with links to go and buy all of Danielle's books, and the books that she's discussed, I'm sure. I want to tell artists that I love and adore them. It's a good goal.